All right, so make sure that you're seated in a place where you can see this. Really quickly, I'm going to explain to you what some of these symbols mean, because what we're doing is we're looking, it's like we're in a helicopter looking down at the battlefield. And what's weird about the Battle of Rorke's Drift, a drift is kind of like an area of a river. And that would be actually up here. The river's here, and it's here. And this was initially a mission, and which is where you put religious people to spread your religion. And so this was originally a mission, then it became a storehouse and a trading post. A guy named Rorke ran a trading post here, hence the name Rorke's Drift. So it's the name of a guy and it's a location. And so that's what we're looking at. And to give you an idea of some of the parts of this, this would be a storeroom that's basically made out of thick mud and brick. So it's almost hardened into, almost like stone. So this is a big storeroom. This is eventually going to be turned into a hospital, which is a multi-roomed building. And this stuff wasn't there initially. Right? And a kraal is basically a corral. It's just a different spelling. And this is where you put your cows. There was another one that happened to be over here. But the kraals were made, in this case, also of a wood and stone and like a mud brick, to give you an idea. There was also a wall that was here, a road up here, and then heading this way to Islandwana. Right around here, there just happened to be a ditch, and there was a mountain set up right here, just to give you an idea of the geography. When you see something that looks like this, a red-blue dot, that represents 3 British soldiers. That is cavalry. Right? It's the square that's partially colored in. This would be the Zulu. The Zulus in this instance are represented by blue. And they were all infantry, meaning they were all on foot. And so what you have is the Battle of Rorke's Drift. It's part of the Anglo-Zulu War, January 22nd and 23rd of 1879. The Zulu called this Kwajimu, which means Jim's land. That's the only reason I added that, because that sounds really cool, because I'm Jim. Okay, it was cool for me. So what we have is 2 groups of people. You have the United Kingdom, the British. They are going to be in this area because they're actually supporting Lord Chelmsford's moves into Zululand. And they are led by a guy named Lieutenant John Chard. He is of the Royal Engineers, and then Lieutenant Bromhead. And I told you I would say lieutenant rather than lieutenant, which I did. There's also going to be about 140 regular British soldiers, the guys I showed you before that were wearing red and that we had seen also previously in the Battle of Isandlwana. All right. There's going to be 11 colonials and 4 civilians. So there's not a lot of people here. Eventually there's going to be some native Natal cavalry. They'll show up, about 100 of them. And so you have essentially 150-ish individuals who are going to be involved in the battle. For the Zulu side, you have a dramatically larger number of people. You're going to have about 4,000 Zulu warriors from the original Impi. But these guys are from the Undi, which is the loins of the attack. You guys remember from the Battle of Isandlwana, you had, it was almost like the head of a bull. The main body of the soldiers was in the center, and then the horns would reach out. Well, these guys were called the loin. They were held back in reserve. So the Zulu that are involved in the Battle of Rorke's Drift were at Isandlwana, but they didn't participate in the fighting. They were held in reserve. And so they wanted to get involved in the fighting because they had defeated the British and they wanted their part in the battle. Completely understandable. And so what you have is The Zulu are going to be led by the half-brother of King Cetshwayo. His name is Prince Dablumanzi Kampande. Dablumanzi Kampande. I worked on that last night. I really tried. And he is going to be in charge of the Zulu warriors. He was told very specifically not to fight the British in Natal, or not to fight the British outside of the Zulu kingdom. He's going to break that, right? He's going to go off and attack, and it's not going to go well, spoiler alert. All right, so what you have is Lord Chelmsford is going to bring this massive force, his British army, into Zululand, and he's going to use this area right here at Rorke's Drift as a place to put all of his extra supplies and create a field hospital for anyone who's injured. And this is smart. You want to have areas where you have supplies, so you don't have to go all the way back to where you started to get food and ammunition and stuff like that. So this is essentially a supply depot with a hospital. You garrison it with a small number of troops just to protect your stuff so someone can't come in and take your supplies. And so that's what happened. Lord Chelmsford is going to leave a guy named Major Spalding in charge, and he is going to, with the army, leave towards Isandlwana on January 20th. All right. Spalding, within a couple of days, is going to start kind of freaking out because he was expecting some reinforcements to arrive here, and they didn't arrive. And that's odd. He's like, how come I haven't heard about this? Well, the reason that the reinforcements didn't arrive is because what happened? Do you guys remember? Well, yeah.
They were all like killed or like crushed in the other battle.
Yeah, at the Battle of Isandlwana. Exactly. And so that's why these reinforcements aren't there, but people don't know. So Spalding takes some of his guys, and he is going to leave in order to try to figure out what's going on. So this is a problem for Lieutenant Chard and Lieutenant Bromhead, because they've lost some of their men. Right? They're in an exposed position. They've lost some of their men, but they don't think anything's really wrong. They don't know until later that day, when two survivors from the Battle of Isandlwana show up and say, hey, by the way, we've lost much of our army. And a massive Zulu impi is approaching. So imagine this. You're about 150 guys, and you have what ends up being about 4,000 Zulu heading your way, and they've already defeated a huge part of your army. Think of how scary that would be. So what's going to happen is the lieutenants are going to get together with all of the important people, all the officers and some of the civilians, and they had a council of war. There are two options. What do you think their two options are? What could they do? Be brilliant. Please.
You could surrender.
Yeah, you could surrender. Yeah, that's pretty easy. You could surrender and just hope for goodwill. That's a possibility. What else? What else can you do anytime there's danger? Yeah.
Run to somewhere safe.
You could run. Absolutely. In military parlance, you call it a strategic withdrawal or a retreat. You don't want to run, but you could go to a different defensible position. That is possible. You could stand and fight against overwhelming odds. Here's the problem that vexed the lieutenants. If they were to pack up and try to leave, they've got a whole bunch of gear. They also have a whole bunch of people in the hospital. And they're not sure if, do they leave them there to be killed? Do they take them with them? The problem is they can't move fast. They're in carts and they're marching, carrying stuff. The impis are super fast, or the Zulu. Their army is fast. They'll be caught out in the open and they'll be massacred. So what the officers decide to do is they'll stand and fight. But in order to do that, they're going to do the opposite of what happened at Isandlwana. Remember, to Isandlwana, you didn't have a real defensive position set up. They just didn't think they needed it because of hubris. These guys know that the Zulu can defeat them, and probably will. So they're going to set up a defensive position to give themselves the best possible chance of survival. And here's what they did. They take what they call mealie bags. A mealie bag is a bag of grain. And they stack up mealie bags up to about this height. That allows a soldier to put his rifle on the top of it, and they're protected. So they create a wall of mealie bags. They had a couple of carts here, 2 wagons, and then they took mealie bags, and then a whole bunch of them here. And they spent hours making a fort out of their supplies. Yeah.
Couldn't like the bullet just go through the mealie bag?
You have to have a bunch of them.
Okay.
But the benefit of a mealie bag against a Zulu is your average Zulu is going to be armed with either an assegai or an ikwa, which is a long or a short spear. And so you don't have to worry about them shooting through it, because very few of them are going to have guns. What we did find out is that a few of them did. And 30% of all of the deaths that occurred amongst the British soldiers actually were from gunfire, because a gun is very effective. And they were guns that were taken primarily off of the bodies of British soldiers at Isandlwana. There were a few old muskets also. So what they did is they created this defensive position, and they then poked holes in the walls. They used things like their bayonets to poke holes through the walls. They blocked the windows. They blocked the doors. You didn't want to have a huge window open, because then they can get at you. And so you locked the windows, but you made a little hole in the wall. Back in ancient times, they called them arrow loops, but now these are just firing loops. And what you do is you can put your gun through it and shoot at the enemy, and you're protected. So they did that here, and they did that in the storeroom. Then they placed soldiers all around the perimeter. Right? There aren't a lot of them, but they did the best that they could, and they don't 100% know where the Zulu are coming. When they do find out where the Zulu are coming from, they're coming from this direction, and there are an unbelievably large number of them. This representation is relatively close. Relatively close. And so the little red dots represent the British. Here's a small cavalry unit on the British side. There's a lot of Zulu, an unbelievably large number of Zulu, and they are spoiling for a fight. What's going to happen is they're going to attack heading north, and they're going to the initial attack from the Zulu is going to head from this direction here. The Zulu also put guys with guns up here to shoot into the compound here. Luckily for the British were better shots, and they were able eventually to take these guys out with just more accurate gunfire. And so during the battle, these guys are eventually going to be eliminated. But you have this massive army moving up this way. Now, the Zulu have been moving since 8 in the morning, and it's about 4:20 at this point. So the Zulu have been basically jogging to get to this battle. So they're pretty tired. This is a pretty epic thing. So they start to head in this direction, and when they get 500 yards out, the British open fire. 500 yards. I mean, think about how far that is. That is 5 football fields, right? If you've ever run the 400-meter dash, it's more than that. That is a long range to start shooting, but the British were trained to do this. And so they started firing, and they're firing into mass groups of Zulu, and it's going to have an effect. It really is. The Zulu can't even get to these guys, and they're taking casualties. The British want this to happen. They don't want the Zulu to get close, because all they have to do is get up here, and they can hop over that wall. It's certainly possible. So the initial assault by about 600 of the Zulu is going to come right there. And they're going to make it to the wall, but after repeated charges, they can't get over. It just doesn't happen. There's too much concentrated firepower coming at them. So this first assault by the Zulu isn't 100% effective. It just isn't. It's repulsed numerous times. So they decide, instead of going against this section, the next group will go here. They'll attempt to go against the hospital, and they'll attempt to come here to attack this section of the mealy bag wall. And this is going to be more effective. Now, what's fascinating is you have to have guys posted here, but they're not necessarily engaged in the battle, right? Because they can't. You could move them here, but what happens if these guys swing here? So the British are forced to guard this whole perimeter, even though they're only being attacked in parts of it. One other thing that's going to happen is the cavalry unit, this really small cavalry unit, about 100 guys on horses, are going to swing over to attack. And they do. They swing over to attack. They're using carbines, which are shorter guns. But these guys have already been at battle, and they were at Islandwana. Right? They showed up a little bit later, and when these guys were preparing for the battle, and they're like, yeah, the Zulu are coming, and we got our butts handed to us. We'll do the best we can. They led a charge, ran out of ammunition, and then they decided they were going to go away to warn other people, which is frustrating because they're on horses, they attacked, and then they ran away. These guys are frustrated by that. Some guys that were here, not the British regulars, but some guys that were here did leave. They jumped over and they ran off. British regulars fired at them, right, because they were seen as traitors. It just happened in the heat of battle. So this cavalry unit is out of the battle, right? There wasn't much that they could do anyway. So what you have is a major attack here. You have a major attack against the hospital ongoing. And in the hospital, what the British found is that when they would poke their guns out of the holes, a Zulu would grab the gun and pull it out. And so these holes, little fighting holes that they made, weren't as effective as initially they had been planned. And plus, the Zulu then could poke their spears through the holes or steal the guns and fire in. So the hospital is becoming a very difficult place to maintain. And what starts to happen is the Zulus start to get in. And it becomes a room-to-room type of a battle. And the thing is, there's about 39 guys in hospital beds in here because they've been injured. And so the guys that can keep firing are firing. At this point, they're down to their revolvers because it's room to room. They're fighting in an area often that is about a quarter of this room, right? It's literally, you could basically touch the enemy. So they're using their revolvers and they're attempting to try to break out of here. They can't even go through their own door because the door has been barricaded. And so what they start to do is they start to dig through the walls. While one guy is shooting here, another guy's digging through the wall to get out. And they're grabbing the guys that are injured and they're slowly moving them through the building, and eventually they were able to jump out a window here. At this point, the hospital was lit on fire by the Zulu. So this is on fire. At this point of the battle, it's kind of interesting. This has been going on for hours. The hospital's on fire. This area is back and forth. Every once in a while, the Zulu make it over the wall. And then the British back up, and then they do a bayonet charge, a coordinated bayonet charge. And so far, that's working. But people realize, the lieutenants realize that they can't maintain this. So what they had done, they made a secondary wall of biscuit boxes. These are wooden boxes that used to have food in them, biscuits. And they made a secondary wall here. And the order was given when you could no longer control this, you could no longer control this, all of these guys were ordered to retreat. These guys are already out. They were all ordered to retreat behind here. So all of the survivors are here and here. Then the Zulu make it in. And they start attacking here. The battle is about 6 or 7 hours old at this point. Imagine fighting for 7 hours. That is unbelievable. These guys are shooting here. The Zulu are trying to get here. More Zulu sweep over here, and they make it through the crowd. These guys are now in here. So you have an unbelievable last stand situation. So Zulu are here. A mass of them are here. Zulu are here. There's still Zulu here. They've surrounded the whole area. Nightfall comes. The British have an advantage. That's on fire. It's keeping this whole area lit so the British can see the Zulu. They can see them coming. And so they're able to shoot at the Zulu. It gets to be about 2 in the morning. At 2 in the morning, these guys are still here. Occasionally they move into this other defensive position when necessary. But as it's getting darker and darker, the Zulu attacks become less and less frequent. By 4 a.m., all of the shooting has stopped. And the defenders don't know what the heck is going on because they can't see the Zulu. When the morning does eventually arrive, the Zulu are gone. And the British have maintained this small area. They went out, they looked for their injured, they went out and they looked at the dead Zulu, of which there were many. The British lost 17 soldiers, 17. The Zulu lost officially 351. That was the number of bodies that were buried, but estimates can go higher or lower. We're really not sure. But no matter what, the British were outnumbered 40-1, but because they used an effective defensive position and they were effectively led, they were able to hold out. Of the 20,000 rounds or bullets that they had at the beginning of the day, the second day they had 900 left. So they were, within a few hours, had the Zulu continued the attack, the British would have run out of ammunition. But the Zulu didn't continue the attack. They moved off. Another entire Zulu impi showed up. An entire new army showed up. And these guys are like, you've got to be kidding us. There's no way they could withstand that. But it was at that time also that Lord Chelmsford's relief column arrived. And so the Zulu recognized that they just didn't want this fight. They didn't need it. They'd already had a victory. It was time to cut their losses and leave. And what's going to happen as a result of this battle? You're going to get 11 Victoria Crosses. That's the most Victoria Crosses in a single engagement by a single regiment in British history. A Victoria Cross is similar to a Medal of Honor in our military. It's the ultimate recognition of bravery above and beyond what is expected of a British soldier. And so it is a big deal. The Anglo-Zulu Wars continued. The British learned from their mistakes and eventually end up victorious after numerous other battles. But the Battle of Rorke's Drift is definitely one of the most important last stands in military history. Now it's appropriate to clap. Thank you. I need to feel good about that. Thanks, guys.